Hello everybody, welcome to yet another live stream here from Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies. I'm going to try out a brand new thing here. Bam! Hopefully you guys saw that little animation there. First time doing that on a live stream. Anyway, thanks for checking this out, guys. Thanks for joining me once again. I'm going to give this a second and make sure that everything is good with the live stream. Let me know in the comments if you can hear me okay, if you can see the screen okay, if everything is going smoothly. Hopefully it is. And I'm just, again, going to keep an eye on this for a second before I dive into this tutorial. As you guys can see, for today's tutorial, I will be doing another photo here that I took earlier this week. This is my favorite photo from the week. And looks like we've got some people joining us now, so that's great. And again, let me know in the chat if you could hear me, if you could see the screen okay, if everything is going as according to plan. So yeah, I'll be editing this photo. I took this photo in a place called Union Station here in Denver. It is a really cool little spot here, local spot. And I took this with a lot of natural light. I actually took this in the same location as the last photo that I used in my other tutorial. And I'm just multitasking here a little bit. All right, thanks, Jerry. Thanks for confirming. Everything looks good. Everything sounds good. Okay, perfect. That's what I was looking for. Cool. Thanks, Heath. Thanks, Neon. And thanks, Jerry, Neon Cypher. Thank you for joining me as well. So this was actually taken in the same location as the other photo that I used. And this, again, Union Station, Denver. There was a lot of natural light used in this photo, but also a decent amount of artificial light. You guys can see here the lighting inside the building. We had some diffused light. The color temperatures here between the two lights are a little bit different. It wasn't a major issue for this photo, but this was the final photo that I edited. This was actually the original photo here, and I will have this file to download from my website once this tutorial is done. So for now, you guys can just observe. If you're watching the re-recorded recorded version of this live stream, then you guys will be able to download this link directly from my website. And hello, Sunflame. Thank you for joining us. As per usual, guys, you can support our channel through the Super Chat feature, and that'll also help your chat stand out. If you guys want to comment, ask a question, maybe just give me a comment of support, whatever. We have had people use the Super Chat in the past. That is super, super helpful when you guys do that for my channel. Helps fund the channel, helps keep everything going, helps me pay the bills, all that good stuff. But anyway, before I dive into this photo editing session, as usual, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in my best-selling GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And I have a discount link in the description, so you guys can ignore that price. You're going to pay a much lower price for that. And of course, you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. I just uploaded, you can't see it because it's locked in this view that I have going on, but I uploaded something called the Patreon Office Hours. And this is a new series I'm going to be starting on Patreon where I just give you guys an update on what's going on with the channel, perhaps GIMP news if anything important is coming out with GIMP, and then just general behind-the-scenes updates. So I'll be doing this on a weekly basis via a live stream, and I'm trying to figure out a good time to do this for everybody on Patreon. So I asked those of my patrons that are on here that can see this to post the time and day that it works best for them. So feel free to support me on Patreon, and you guys can be a part of that Patreon office hours. And you can also ask me questions on there if you miss the live stream on here. So if Fridays at 1 Mountain Standard Time don't work for you, you can become a patron. Let me know what time the quote-unquote office hours will work for you, and maybe we can align our schedules, and you can ask me questions directly on there and provide feedback to the channel as well. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the actual portion of this tutorial where I show you guys how to edit this image. So here was the original image again, and you could tell if you look between the original image and the or I'm sorry, if you look between the edited image and the original image, you can see it's a decent amount darker here. The colors are a little bit off, and it's less sharp. And I'm going to be going over the 10-step process for photo editing that I went into in my last tutorial. I'm sort of executing that process for this tutorial, and it's going to help you guys have a little bit more practice. And hey, Rico, thanks for joining. I've been enjoying our conversation in the comments section there about the backdrop and everything, so appreciate that. But thanks for joining me. And yeah, I'm going to find a better way to let everybody know that the live streams are happening. And I did send out a message in the GIMP newsletter, so if you're not a part of that, you can sign up for the GIMP newsletter on my website. Again, daviesmediadesign.com. Let me flash that graphic on the screen here again. And you guys can sign up for the newsletter. It's completely free. I just give you guys a glimpse into what's going on, what is happening in the GIMP world, as well as all the latest tutorials that have come out on my channel. Okay, I'm rambling a bit, and I know some of you are going to comment about that, so let me just move on here. And all right, so I'm going to start with that 10-step process. Usually I go with the scaling and cropping of the image. In this case, it's a pretty large image, so I'm going to scale it down. I'm not going to crop it because I don't think this image really needs a crop. I really like how there's lights that kind of frame the top part of this image. I just think it looks really cool. It almost looks like it's a good mixture between modern and sort of like old school, because that's really what Denver's Union Station is. They renovated an old train station and turned it into a really cool modern like hangout spot. So definitely a cool mixture right here of the modern and the classic look. So what I'm going to do to start is scale this down. So I'm going to go to Image, Scale Image. And here we've got the X and Y resolution are 72. That's fine for this image for me because I'm only using this on the web. And the width and height are pretty huge right now. So what I'm going to do is scale the largest dimension of this, which is the height, down to 1920, and hit the Tab key, and that will scale this down to 1280. And I have my unit set to pixels here. And sorry, I just got a phone call there. But I'm going to go ahead and hit the scale button here, and that's going to scale my image. And glad I could give you a break from your video editing, Rico, for this tutorial. So yeah, thanks for joining me. Glad you appreciate the exchange we had there. All right, so here is our scaled image now. So I'll hold Control and zoom in a bit. So I did scale this down pretty significantly. I don't know if I scaled the last, no, I didn't scale this one down quite as much for the other video. I'm sorry, I hate to do this to you guys, but I'm just going to undo that and real quick scale it down to what I had for the last time I edited this. I'll just change it to 3000 and 3000 by 2000. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. And if any of you guys had a chance to check out that latest tutorial I posted and you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. I thought it was a pretty cool tutorial, pretty cool photo. I did a photo shoot. I had mentioned in my last live photo editing session that I was going to be doing a photo shoot featuring more models. So obviously that's what I've been doing here. So hopefully you guys are enjoying that content. I personally am a big fan of modern architecture, so that's why I tend to take a lot of photos of modern architecture, especially in the area. So yeah, but models are also really good too to have in photos. So hopefully having these models in the photos has been enjoyable for you guys. Okay, so we have gone ahead and scaled our image down to 3000 by 2000, and this might be just a little bit more workable image in terms of getting this back to the original image that I edited before. I don't want the two to be too different from one another, even though they probably will be slightly different. But all right, so now I'm going to dive into, since I'm not cropping this, the next portion, which is the Shadows Highlights feature. So to edit this, I'm going to go to Colors, Shadows Highlights. And here we have the Shadows Highlights tool. I have an entire tutorial dedicated to this tool, and you guys can check that out, of course, as always, on my YouTube channel. And so what I'm doing with this is I'm adjusting the pixels in the shadows when I adjust the shadow slider here. And so that is going to help bring up some of the brightness of the shadows you can see in this image. So really like, you know, the brim of her cowboy hat or the cowgirl hat, her hair, and just some of these darker parts of the image. I do want to bring those out. Even her face is in the shadows. I think the front part of her is in the shadows. So I want to bring those details out so that we can you know, have a better view of her face and just the front portion of her body. Just because obviously she is the center of this photo, and so we don't want, you know, the main subject of our photo being real dark and hard to see. And Jerry, yeah, I didn't create a copy for this. I could do that, and let me just do that real quick. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I do like to sometimes have a copy so we can compare it to the original. And let me just change the name of this to Cowgirl here, and let me go back to colors, shadows, highlights, and then we can just sort of reference the original as we go. I'm glad you brought that up because I always forget to do that, and then I wish at the end that I did do it. But all right, so now I am on the copy layer, thanks to Jerry's comment there. And now we're back to bringing up the shadows details. So the issue with this, usually when you're doing this, is that you'll start to see pixels in the highlights start to come out a little bit more as well. And then if you overdo it, you can bring out too much noise in the image and too much artifacts, too many artifacts, things of that nature. So you want to find a happy medium between bringing out the details and keeping the noise and the artifacts at a minimum. So that's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I'm looking for. And now I'm going to work on my highlights. So in this case, I'm going to look at the highlight parts of my image. So the light sources here, you know, the windows, the light here, the lamp. I'm just going to take a look at those and see, do I want to decrease them maybe? Do I want to increase them? Obviously, I don't want to do it all the way either way. So I do want to, again, find a happy medium here. Maybe you like having sort of a glow going on behind here with the lights. That would be one reason to increase the highlights, or maybe you think they're a little bit overbearing and you want to decrease them a little bit. There's also other tools that will allow you to play with the lighting and sort of how well it's gelling with the main model in the photo. So I'm actually just going to leave the highlights for now. I don't remember if I tweaked them at all in the original image. And I'm actually going to just adjust the shadows a little bit more. And now what I'll do is I'll adjust the white point adjustment. And by the way, the reason I haven't adjusted the highlight or the shadow color adjustments is because it hasn't really screwed up the colors at all or much at all, so I don't feel the need to do that. And if you want to know more about those, again, I recommend checking out that shadows highlights tutorial. But now I can adjust the white point, which is going to really bring up the brightness of the entire image. So you can see as I do that, it's just making the overall image brighter and just look a little bit better. This happens to be a pretty significant shift in the white point, and it looks pretty good, but I am hesitant to make such a large shift, especially with there being other tools that I can use to accomplish, you know, brightening my image overall. And then what I did in the original is I played around with the radius and the compress options to see what looked better. And in this case, I like turning the radius up a little bit. And then the compress, that looked pretty good turned down. So yeah, I'm going to go with turning that down. So here's a before, here's an after. Already it's looking significantly better. It's not quite as bright as the other image that I edited. So I'm just going to click OK for now. We're going to go back and edit some other options here to work on the brightness a bit more. And so now what I'm going to do is the next step in this process is to do the color balance. So I'm going to go to Colors, Color Balance. And yeah, Rico, good point. You can open up the original as a layer and then move it below your layers you've worked on. That's definitely a step you can take if you forgot to, you know, duplicate your image in the beginning of the process. So now I'm in the midtones part of my image and I am using my color balance tool. I go over all this stuff in depth in my 10-step process to edit a photo in GIMP tutorial that I just put out before this one. So definitely watch that if you want more of an explanation. But for now, I'm just going to tweak these based on the old eye test as I call it. Obviously not my invention, the eye test terminology, but now I'm going to just sort of play around with these, and you don't always have to make an adjustment. So if you're on, one of these ranges and you try out, either adding more yellow or adding more blue and you don't like the look of it, you don't have to change that setting in that range. So now we're going to move on to the shadows. And so far, adding cyan to the midtones and shadows looks better, in my opinion. You guys might want to create your own, looks, use your own color settings. But in my case, I happen to like adding cyan, and then trying to figure out if I want blue or yellow. In this case, I think adding a touch of blue is going to help. Doesn't have to be a ton. So here's a before so far. Here's after. So you can see the original was a little bit more red. And so that is something that we have sort of mitigated, I suppose. And the highlights here, the cyan isn't having as much of an effect, so we don't necessarily have to change that. So now we could check out green or magenta. I'm not a big fan of adding too much of either of those colors, but I think a touch of green does look a little bit better. And then we can go blue or yellow. And again, I'm hesitant to add too much of either color here in this setting because there are other ways of adding yellow or blue to the overall image. And I know this is just adjusting the highlights, but I don't see anything that warrants adding a ton of yellow to the highlights or blue. So maybe just add a little bit more yellow there. So there's a before, there's an after, and I'll click OK. Hey Sergio, thanks for joining. And all right, so sorry, I'm just reading the comments simultaneously here. Enrico said that this module blew me away. If you could specify the module, I'm not sure what exactly you're referencing to there, but I'm going to move on now to the levels. And so this is a sort of a fancy way of adjusting brightness contrast in your image. And so now we're going to move on to the levels here. So we've got the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. And so you'll see why I said it's sort of an advanced way of adjusting the brightness contrast. It kind of does it simultaneously. I know a lot of the more technical people out there will say it's not the same, for this reason or that reason. But as I edit this, you could see why I'm making that comparison, even if they aren't exactly the same. We are getting a brighter image here. There's a before, there's an after, and this does add a little bit of contrast, maybe not quite as much as the actual contrast tool would, but it is certainly adding contrast as well as brightness. So there's a before, there's an after. Let me just tweak the highlights a bit more and see if there's anything more I can add to this without adding too much. Maybe somewhere around here. The color balance. Okay, yeah. Color balance module is definitely one of my favorites in GIMP. I use that one all the time. You can, I got a question on my last tutorial about, using the different channels here inside the levels tool to adjust the colors of your image. You can use that. I tend to not like to do that. I think some other photographers do like to do that. So I think that's a matter of personal preference. I think it's just simpler to use the color balance tool, so that's what I use. All right, I'll click OK there, and we've got a slightly brighter image now. And so next I'm going to move on to the saturation tool option. So I'll go to Colors, Saturation, and of course this is going to allow me to increase or decrease the intensity of the colors in my image. So I always like to play around. So when I increase the saturation for this particular image, I think it makes the colors too intense, and it just doesn't match the mood of the image, in my opinion, for whatever reason. I think it still looks good, and I think if you were to export this with this look right here, it would look fine, but I thought that when I desaturated this image in particular, it made it look a little bit more dramatic, and I thought it just matched the mood a little bit. And it helped also the foreground object, in this case our model, blend a little bit better with the background. Not in a way that's going to have her get lost in the background, but more so just help the two match in terms of color and I guess composition. So there's a before, there's an after, pretty subtle change there, but I did decrease the saturation slightly, and I'll just click OK. So we're not done with the color yet. For those of you who did watch that 10-step process to editing photos tutorial, you'll know there is still the color temperature option, and that's what we're going to hit up next here. So let's go to colors, color temperature, and now we can really test out what color temperature is going to look better for this image. Do we want a warmer image? Do we want a cooler image? Or do we want to just leave the image as is? And so let me just try out both ways. So that's a little bit warmer. That looks pretty good. This is a little bit cooler. Also looks good. Excuse me. So it's going to come down to personal preference on this one. And I don't know if warmer necessarily improves the look for me, if I tend to like that. This was a winter day, so you could make the argument for wanting a cooler image, but the lights, the artificial lights in the room were a bit of a warmer tone, so you could also make that argument for a warmer image. And I'm getting a question here. Is it possible to create the teal and orange effect in photos using GIMP? So Victor, I have a tutorial on how to edit like Brandon Welfel. I think that might be the best tutorial for you to check out for that, because I do go into putting color tints and stuff on your images. So I'm going to just warm this very slightly. This is way less than I would usually add to an image, because I think that the color temperature looked pretty good as is on the original. So I'll click OK. And all right, so next up, I'm going to get into the curves tool. As you guys know, the curves is going to add some contrast in here. So we already added contrast with the levels tool, but we're going to add a little bit more with the curves tool. And so here is the curves here. I'm going to create a point in the center. This is like right in the midtones of the image, and make sure that that didn't move around there. If it moved around too much, you could just hit the reset option and start again. And all right, so now I'm going to adjust the shadows of my image. And as per usual, I'm just going to tweak this ever so slightly. And so there, we've added a little bit of contrast. So there's a before and there's an after. And hi, Jesse, thanks for joining us from South Africa. And so there you can see we've added a little bit of contrast here, so I'll click OK. And there is our final image with a little bit more contrast. And I can also test out, I didn't mention this in my last tutorial, but I can also test out the brightness contrast and see if there's anything we could add to this by adding brightness. I'm going to actually say no to that already, I can just tell. So I'm going to just cancel that out there. All right, so now I'm going to move into touching this up is what I would usually do with an image, especially one that has a model in it. In this case, I don't think I really did anything to touch it up just because your complexion looked pretty good, but we can smooth out the complexion a little bit more. Yeah, I was going to mention, please, I don't usually allow any sort of promotion on the chat, so I'd appreciate it if we can sort of not do that on the chat. But all right, so we are going to use the airbrush tool here and just increase the size of it. And now I'm going to hold the control key and click on here to grab a color. And now I'm going to just, paint over some parts of the skin here just to kind of smooth out some of the complexion. And again, in the original photo I edited, I don't even think I did a touching up at all. If I did, I barely did it. So Let me just undo that because that was actually too much. You can also adjust the opacity here of the airbrush. And let me just try to use the brackets on my keyboard to decrease the size of this. And just grab multiple colors. I'm not going to do too much with the airbrush here because, you know, it starts to make her skin look fake, and that's not usually something I enjoy doing with the models in my photos. You guys hear me use the phrase artificial a million times. And yeah, I think that's actually going to be good. So again, I don't want to overdo it. I almost didn't want to do that at all, but there we go. So now we've airbrushed the skin tone of the model here. I could go more into that if I wanted to, but then you start getting into like the Vogue look that I'm not a big fan of, you know, Cosmopolitan or whatever. I don't like when those magazines overdo the airbrushing. So moving on, we're going to use the Sharpen Unsharp Mask tool to sharpen this up a little bit. The original image that I edited was much sharper than this one, and actually I think the color temperature is different from this one too. I don't think I added any color temperature to it. And real quick before I get into that, let me address this question. So, interesting YouTube name. I was trying to use the clone tool and airbrush to touch up a photo the other day, but it looked really fake when I did so. Tips for making the blending seem natural. There's multiple options here. By the way, the GIMP team recently announced on Twitter that they were working on an update to basically the heal tool, where if you have, let's say you create a new layer here and you name this like touching up, and I'll hit the enter key, and you know, right now basically what you have to do is you click on this layer manually, hold the tab key, grab a color, then come over here, click on this layer, and you can, I think, paint the color on this layer. It's kind of like a more complicated process than it needs to be. Same with the heal tool, except I believe the heal tool, you have to be on the same layer that you're trying to edit. So they're going to change this tool to where you can more easily access colors from like below layers using this tool. Anyway, I shouldn't be getting into this right now, but the short answer to your question really, and let me just delete this touching up example layer, is that, for example, if you're using the airbrush and the colors are coming out and it looks super fake, you're just applying way too much of a color to, for example, your model's face. One step is to decrease the opacity like I just did. Another is you can come over here to hardness, and if you turn the hardness down, it's going to create a softer brush. So the edges of your brush aren't going to be as hard, which means it's going to allow it to transition a little bit more smoothly to the pixels around it, and therefore blend a little bit better with the pixels, you know, the surrounding pixels in an image. And then your other options are, you can come over here to rate and flow, and if you turn the rate down, that technically does not allow the paint to come out of the hypothetical paintbrush, the digital paintbrush that you're painting with, as fast. So by doing that, you're essentially controlling how much color is coming out of, you know, this digital paintbrush as you're painting, and that can help to make this paintbrush come out a little bit softer and therefore not look quite as artificial. So I'm always like adjusting my opacity to see, you know, what looks best, and to make sure I'm not applying too much or too little. And then flow is kind of the same thing. Rate and flow are like interrelated. I'm not going to get too much into that, but you can always adjust your flow as well, and that'll help, you know, determine how this stuff is coming out of your brush. And I don't want to spend too much time on this again, but let's go over to the heal tool real quick because you asked about the heal tool. You know, this one is more so about adjusting the size of your brush. So if I decrease the size of my brush with the heal tool, and let's say, I mean, she's got a freckle here. I don't necessarily want to get rid of this, but for the sake of example, if I want to get rid of this freckle, I don't want a brush that's like this size because that's way too huge. So I typically want to decrease the size of my brush to the size of the area I'm trying to heal. And then you want to grab an area that's really close by and use that then to heal the area. And usually you have to click multiple times to grab the source area and then run over that with the heal tool. And now you can see it's gotten rid of that without, you know, making that look too artificial. And let me just undo that because I didn't actually want to get rid of that. But that hopefully answered your question. That was an attempt anyway to answer that question. So let me move on now. So we've touched this up, so now I'm going to sharpen this up. So I'll click on the Cowgirl layer, and I'm going to go to Filters, Enhance, Sharpen, and this is going to sharpen our overall image. And so, as I mentioned in my other tutorial, you don't typically want to turn the sharpen up too much. Usually the default that it comes with works fine. Unless you have a pretty blurry image, you might need to turn the radius and amount up. But here's a before, here's an after. And let me just tweak the amount up a tiny bit, maybe a little bit less. So I didn't add that much. And now I'll click OK. So this has been sharpened. And then the last thing we could do here is add a vignette. So I'll create a new layer, name this vignette. I don't know if I added a vignette to my original, but now I can go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette. And now I'm going to increase the radius a bit. And then I also, in this case, want to shift the vignette because it's not really properly drawing the eye to the subject here. So I'm going to shift the center X position of the vignette so that it's more centered on the model, just like that. And I can also adjust the softness if I want. And I'll go with that and I'll click OK. So that's obviously too prominent. So what I can do is just turn down the opacity a little bit, like so. There's a before, there is an after. Let me just go a little bit more here. All right, so there is my final image. Hopefully you guys liked that. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit my website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can support us on Patreon and support our channel and help us grow. And I've got a link to our Patreon account there, but that's just patreon.com/daviesmediadesign. And of course, you can enroll in my best-selling GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And of course, the discount link to that is in the description. But real quick, I'll just show you guys how to export this. So File, Export As, and change this to whatever name you want. You can navigate through the files here if you want to change the destination. I'm just going to keep this destination here. Hit Export. Turn the quality up and hit Export again. And there we go. So let's do a before. This is what the image looked like before we edited it. Shift click after. There is our final image. And that is nice and ready for something like Instagram or a website. Or if you wanted to print this out, you can make sure that the resolution is set to 300 ppi, and then you could go ahead and print this out. All right, guys, if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. I usually hang around for a minute or so after the live stream. Otherwise, thanks for checking out this live stream, and I will definitely see you guys next time.